So welcome, Aya. This is an intimate
Thank you.
subgroup of our work mentoring and workshop group.
Yeah, what a great group. A lot of whom I know and really respect and appreciate your work. So this is fabulous.
Yeah, and Katrina
Yes.
is Natalie's friend who is a librarian from Davis. If I don't know if you know each
Oh,
other.
great.
Yeah.
No, but what great to meet you. Thank you for your work. You all are essential workers. Yes.
Thank you.
And I think Carmen's on the phone. Yeah, she's driving from Alameda, so um,
Awesome.
she's
Okay.
there in image and text.
Yes, I see her. I see her and her daughter protesting in the picture. So this is good.
Yay, yay. So
Yeah.
welcome. So you all know
Thank
Aya.
you.
I was going to just quickly say a little bit or even share a little bit about you before we get into the conversation in case people want to know more. See if you can see my world of too many links. So Aya, you can see here the director of the Poetry of the People, June Jordan Center.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll talk more about your Justice Hustlers, feminist heist novels. And
Mhm.
Side Chick Nation, the first novel published about Hurricane Katrina.
Maria.
Maria,
Hurricane
sorry,
Maria.
wrong
Yes.
one.
I'm gonna disappear for a minute while you screen share, but I'll be right back.
Okay, cool. And has
I'm
published
here.
multiple magazines. I mean, a lot of you know Aya and how amazing she is. And in terms of books, and I hopefully you all know about this new bookshop.org, which is the fantastic alternative to Amazon. So when you buy books through bookshop.org, it goes to support independent bookstores. And actually, they feature indie published books. So like all of Zeta's books are available on bookshop.org. But you can see here, Aya's the Side Chick Nation, The Boss, Uptown Thief, The Accidental Mistress. These are the best reads right now if you're looking for summer reading. Like they're kind of romance, sexy, social justice, featuring sex worker, activist, badass, women, non-binary, like of everything you would expect Aya to do. And they're like super readable and fun. So take a look, buy them. And lots of you will know Aya wrote Puffy, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, People Whose Hair Defies Gravity, that she indie published. And she'll be telling us a lot more about her book that she's got, that her latest that she has also indie published. So that, now I have to figure out how to stop sharing. There we go. Is Aya.
Yeah, the cover's not up on Bookshop yet for the new one, but it will be. Yeah, so that's very exciting.
Yay! And you're doing a launch, like an official launch event for this book Thursday, right?
Thursday through Booklandia, and then Natalie and I are also plotting and scheming. So more to come.
Excellent. So let's make sure we get that information and we can share it out with people, and then they can share it out. So yeah, I'll ask you a few questions, Aya, but I think really this is such a nice small group. Anyone feel free to like jump in. It really can be a conversation. Yeah.
Yes, totally.
So Aya, tell me about how you came to children's books.
That's such a good question. So I have this very long-standing habit of backing into different things. So, so before I wrote books for publication, I was a spoken word artist, and I just sort of kept stumbling into things. I stumbled into slam, then I stumbled into hip hop theater, and I always wanted to be a novelist, but I just didn't really have the attention span to be a novelist in the first several decades of my life. And as I was trying to become a novelist, I'd finally written a novel and was trying to get the agent and do that whole kind of big dance with the industry. I had a baby, which I don't recommend as something that will facilitate your publishing journey. But, ultimately it's worked out fine. But, and I put it off as long as I could. And I was in my early 40s at the time when I had my kid. So I was sort of desperate and discouraged. So I can say I was desperate to get published, totally discouraged about the process, had sent my book out to a bunch of agents, had gotten a lot of no's, and one kind of like, well, maybe if you revised it, you know, and I just was trashed. And I had a small kid, and you know, when you have a small kid, you're reading all these kids' books, and if you have a small kid of color or of African heritage in particular, you're just like, where are the books? You know, because the 10 that were great you've read, and then you have to then invest time into finding the other books, you know, for kids of color that reflect your values, right? So I just started, you know, it just bounced into my head, puffy here, puffy there, yay, I love my puffy hair. So the Dr. Seuss rhyme sort of started freestyling itself in my head, and then I thought, oh, I could do a book. Then I was like, I don't have time to do a book. That's ridiculous. I'm not doing a book. But that year, there was story after story of Black girls getting harassed and thrown out of school for having natural hair, right? And so it was sort of like, the book was like, write me. So eventually I just gave in and wrote it, and I self-published it. And at the time, Ingram was not, this is 2013, Ingram was not as developed as it is now, and Amazon's Create space was much more developed. And I also think that within the indie publishing community, the understanding of Amazon's role had not coalesced as much. So, and I was just a stressed out mom. Hey, hello.
Hi.
Yay, welcome. I was just a stressed out mom, and Amazon as the monopoly had so much resource that I could call them before I ever spent a dime and talk to someone on the phone for an hour and a half about self-publishing, and they offered all that help. And of course, you know, when you're the monopoly with like $1 zillion, you can be generous, right? Just like Jeff Bezos, give us $10 million. People are like, yay. And folks are like, yeah, for us, that would be like 45 cents, you know, so they put it all in context. So I did go with Amazon, and that's where Puffy is. And I was fortunate because even though for the most part, indie bookstores don't mess with Amazon for very good reason, a lot of the Oakland librarians, folks kind of knew my work as a writer and an activist, and folks got their hands on Puffy and liked it and wanted to have it in the library, and sort of really propped me up in a lot of ways. And so I'm not an illustrator, and I was like, let's get pictures. So I just put out this call to the community and online, like, send me pictures of happy Black children with natural hair. And people sent me a ton of pictures. And so that's what I used. And that's what we did, you know, and it, like, the pictures, some of them, they didn't have good enough resolution. I didn't care. I love indie publishing because you're just like, whatever. It's the thought that counts. So it was really fun. And yeah, and it's really kind of for the 0 to 5, and it has a sort of a bouncy, rhymey Dr. Seuss style text, and it's super inclusive, young people, old people, people with disabilities, you know, co-sleeping, same gender loving couples, everybody, you know, it's like I was, you know, there are Black people with puffy hair, Jewish people with puffy hair, Asian people with puffy hair, Latinx people with puffy hair, yay. So that was really fun. And, you know, as I was desperately trying to get an agent for my adult projects, it gave me that sense of completion, right? Like I just felt so held hostage by the literary industry that I was waiting for somebody to discover me and say yes. And it was really lovely to be able to say yes to myself. Yes, I'm going to complete this, especially since when I'd been a spoken word artist, I wanted to do a chapbook. I did a chapbook, and then I was performing and I sold them. And, you know, I even got offered a poetry book deal at that time, and I turned it down because I was like, A, I can make more money selling these for $5 each, having, you know, photocopied them at the copy store. This was, you know, in a different time in terms of social media and online stuff. But also, you know, it was, my work was really for spoken word. It wasn't crafted for on the page. And so I felt like a real book with a real spine. My work was strong. It was really strong in spoken word, but it sort of was more like a play script. And if I published it as a poetry book, I felt like it it would need a lot of editing, and I didn't want to do that work. I wanted to focus on the poetry. But I had that history as a DIY writer, and so it was lovely to do the independent publishing thing and be like, I decided that this book is done, and it's done. And it was, of course, a whole lot of work. But I also went with Amazon Create Space, which is now KDP, because, you know, I didn't want the books in my house. I needed print on demand, and I needed it to be accessible. So that was kind of the first, that was how I came to children's books. And then the second book, Equality Girls and the Purple Reflecto Ray, my daughter got older. We've been reading chapter books, right? So she's in the chapter book age range. And, you know, a lot of these chapter books are just so bad, right? Because they're cheap. And the industry doesn't want to invest very much there because the book, you know, the cover price is like, picture books cost a lot because they have the thick covers and they're beautiful and they have all the full color illustrations, and then middle grade and young adult novels cost more. But these, the children's chapter books are just super cheaply made, and the cover price is low and they don't want to invest. So instead of actually debuting an author who wanted to write books of that length, they'll just have like 5,000 Dora the Explorer books, and then 12 Frozen books, and then, you know, whatever the new thing is, they'll have that, you know, with every movie and TV show and, you know, kind of franchise or brand that children are buying. They'll just do a bunch of chapter books about it, and, you know, the stories are completely uninspiring and mainstream. One of the first chapter books that I did was, you know, there are those rainbow magic fairy books. For those of you who have daughters or girls, you know that there are like 1 trillion of them. And, you know, and they're all different colors, but of course they're not really. It's like fake diversity, and the, you know, and the 2 white girls have interchangeable personalities. And anyway, so it's just like, oh God, my daughter was super into them in preschool, and I read a bunch of them. But it was interesting, like as I read them, I discovered the plot. You know, I discovered the plot structure. I was like, oh, let me try writing one of these. So I have one, Alafia the Ancestor Fairy, which one of these days I will publish somewhere and under a pseudonym that like will put it right next to the official one in the library or in the or in a bookstore. I've like came up with my pseudonym, like I researched different African surnames that would be like perfect. Yeah, so eventually that'll happen. I actually, you know, I've talked to a couple of different publishers about doing it because it's, you know, it's like clearly a parody, but it's a Black and Latina girl, and they have these adventures in Oakland and like poor and working class neighborhoods, and, you know, it's about assimilation and like, oh, the evil bad guys are, you know, taking the magical cowrie shell so that people are forgetting their roots because people who don't know their roots are easier to control. Right, so it's always with the politics. So that book is floating around. I also, some of you know the story, when Bree Newsom took the flag down, it was, you know, my daughter was like 5, and it was a thing where she was moving in a circle of kids who were going to be talking about slavery. And I was like, oh, okay, you know, let me try and get ahead of this a little bit to frame the story, because I want my daughter to know all the things in history, but I think sometimes it's important to frame them so that you can build on concepts that young people understand, especially if it's scary or traumatizing, so that they can take it in a way that they can understand and make sense of, and also to try as an adult to communicate it without being like, ah, you know. So I framed it as a pirate story, and I published it on my blog, and I read it to her, and then, you know, I've been sort of trying to make that a book. My agent's been trying to sell it, so far with no luck. You know, so I think a lot of the children's books really come from the process of parenting, and that in the process of parenting, reading a lot of the books and becoming really curious as a writer about like, ooh, what's it like to write this kind of book? And also just seeing what's missing, you know, and Toni Morrison says, right, when, you know, when there's a book that you really must, that you want to read and it's not there in the world, that you have to be the one to write it. So I think that has just been a natural move for me. And so then Equality Girls came from reading Captain Underpants and, Super Diaper Baby, these really funny books that have like all this toilet humor that are, they're actually really well written and really funny. The Captain Underpants movie I actually liked. It's this lovely bromance about boys who really care about each other and their friendship matters. The TV show, of course, is like these franchise books, just written really quickly with a lot of cliches. But the movie was great. And I love that kind of humor. And I was like, but it's all very boys. It's like boys, boys, boys. All the characters are boys. So I was like, I want to write something like this for girls. And what would the humor be? And I was like, oh, I want to write about sexism. I want humor that's about sexism, where sexism is the butt of the joke. And so I sort of developed this story about a girl who had a group of friends, and, there's some sexism, and then, somehow she has this power that when she gets angry, and it must have been around like 2016, 2017. We've got the Me Too movement, the election, women are angry. I was like, this is some angry girls laughing about sexism. So she gets mad about sexism, and these lasers come out of her eyes and they zap boys, and then boys start acting out their stereotypes about girls. So I was like, oh, because what's the butt of the joke, right? Humor is great, but humor is dangerous because you can be punching down and laughing at people. So, and then I was like, great, well, and then, they can go up against the president who's coming to town to judge a tween beauty contest. Great. So it's really, it was fun. And so I wrote it. My agent, at some point in this process, I sold some adult books. So I have an agent, and, my chapter book, she's like, meh, probably A, because they don't make a lot of money, and B, because she's like, the characterization is shallow. It's like, they're chapter books. It's shallow. That's what it is. But anyway, so I've been sitting on this story, and it's fun. I kind of played with it. But then at the beginning of the year, I was like, oh, it's 2020, and the election's going to happen. And basically, I am hoping that, next year, this book will be dated because we'll have a different president. And if, God forbid, it goes any differently, like, no one will be able to laugh because it will be too tragic. So I was like, now is the year, and this can actually be part of the campaign for regime change. So, of course, I went to Laura and was like, Laura, can you consult with me on this random manuscript? And Laura was like, yes. And so we did a round of consulting. I've had many book doctors at this point and many consultants, and spent sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands. I can say more about that. And then, so we had one round, and then we did a second round. And so I paid for a second round of consulting, which was critical. And then, kind of stumbled forward into self-publishing. And then there was a pandemic. Oh, also, I was going to get someone else to illustrate it. And I'm like, I'll do it, and I am not a professional illustrator, not even super experienced, but it was just a hack, it was like, I used a Sharpie, and I would like do the outline, and I would work on the outline, and then there'd be something off, and I was not going to do it again. So I would just like white out what didn't work and photocopy it and then write more on top of that. Like, it was all about cutting the corners. And, then eventually like colored it in, and I just took photographs of it with my phone and uploaded it, and, I did the design in Canva, so like, I'm really like living proof that you can do this with minimal skills, because, I'm a good writer. Now, it's definitely not a graphic novel. It's not comic style. It's written in prose, and the prose is probably, like if I had had a lot more time and attention, I would have written it a little more kid friendly. It's not kid unfriendly, but I'm used to writing for adults. Folks caught different, like, that word's kind of a big word, but I just sort of went for it. And it's been fun so far. It's, Booklandia, it's on sale on their site, and, I don't know, she sold maybe 50 of them. It's like, great, yay. And it's nice too, to just feel like, I put it out there. and I can work on other things. And then some of the other things that I'm working on are, I have a YA Black Girl Spy book that my agent's been trying and failing to sell for 2 or 3 years. And every now and then we sort of get a new lead, like on Twitter, someone will be like, I'm an editor of color looking for blah, blah, blah. And we send it and they're like, you know, and all my stuff is out there, you know? And so she's like, her family is like spying for this international Pan-African spy organization that, like, you know, gets involved when Black people are being mistreated. You know, it's just, it's out there. But it's great, and it'll eventually find a home. One of the things that I'm doing now is I'm writing another book in the series that has a different girl, that has a Latina girl who can pass for white, who's infiltrating this, basically she's, there's this white supremacist terrorist, and they need someone who can pass for white to try and befriend him to stop this terrorist attack. So I just sent that to her. And it may be that I can sell that in a multi-book deal. It's less, I don't know. It seems like it may be more palatable to the industry, whatever that means. Yeah, so it may be that she can sell that, and then the other one that was written can come out as the second book in the series as a sort of a prequel. So we'll see. And then the other thing you all need to know is that I'm compulsively productive. So if I'm anxious, I write more. So people are like, oh, you're so productive in the pandemic. It's like, yes, I'm very productive in the pandemic. So, and writing is also this way of escape for me, like, especially now, and also normalcy. So like I wake up before my family is awake and I go to the computer and I start writing on my project, and it just grounds me for the day. And yeah, and I'm not reading a lot because when I have time, I'm writing, because it's just, that particular escape is soothing. And, you know, between the pandemic and, you know, this incredibly, I mean, we're in multiple crises, right? We're in a pandemic crisis, we're in a climate crisis, we're in an economic crisis, we're in an electoral crisis, and we're in this incredible crisis with the police. And all of these things are sort of coming to a head, and either we're going to really have some big breakthrough, or we're going to have a big defeat. And we're having some of each, and it's a nail biter. So, and I think publishing is having an interesting crisis. I mean, how about that stuff with what I got, you know, publishing paid me. By the way, my adult novels are published with Kensington Books. Kensington is the largest independent publisher of hardcover, trade paperback, and mass market paperback books in the United States. They were the first in the US to do Black romance in a line that they sold to BET, but then they developed another one. I think it was called Arabesque maybe, and they sold it to BET, and now it's Duffina. So I write for Duffina, and they give me $6,000 per book. They offered 5, and my agent talked them up to 6. And even though it's done well, it's still 6. That's what it is. And part of what we've been trying to do with the YA books is to get a big 5 publisher. My agent's like, all right, let's see if we can move on to something that pays more. So that's what we're trying to do. And so far we haven't. Also, unfortunately, Kensington doesn't do YA because I would just, you know, at this point, we've tried so many places, I would just be like, okay, you know, fine, this won't be the breakthrough book where I make more money. But they don't do YA. And basically they said it's because it requires a different infrastructure and different reps, because the schools and libraries channel is just different from the adult book market. So that's kind of where I am. I also have an adult book that I'm working on with white, it's about climate and it's about class. And so I was interested in sort of separating out class from race. I mostly write about poor and working class, people of color, Black and Latinx. But I wanted to write about class, and so I kind of wanted to take out race as a factor so we could just look at class in this sort of romantic thriller about climate and stuff. So I've been working on that, and so that, you know, we're seeing if that could be my like breakout book. And it would be very typical for me as a Black Latina woman that the book that I would be able to break through with would be the book about white people, right? And, you know, I didn't say, let me write about white people so I can get a big contract. It was like, that was the story I wanted to tell, but I won't be surprised.
Wow, boy, you have covered so much territory. I don't have to ask you questions. It's awesome. And gosh, what a range. I mean, it's so inspiring too. I love the DIY idea. That feels totally right. You're just like, I'm doing it. I'm drawing the pictures. I'm taking pictures with my phone. It's just
right.
Awesome.
I swear, part of it is just like, how do I get this off my to-do list? Like, I'll just do it. Yeah. And so I did.
Well, so I think let's just open it up. I mean, if anybody has a question, if you want to throw a hat into the ring, I can ask questions, but is there anybody?
Oh, I just want to say there's one other book I should mention, which is in December, my first adult spy book comes out from Dafina, and it's called A Spy in the Struggle, and it's standalone about an African-American woman who's working for the FBI who infiltrates a Black eco-racial justice organization in the Bay Area. And, you know, also romantic suspense, a lot of politics, fun, drama. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that coming out. And the other thing I'll say is Kensington had me on a contract doing a book a year. So from 2016 to 2019, I did a book a year, and the spy book was supposed to come out this summer, but they reorganized and started and slowed down. So instead of coming out in June of 2020, it's coming out technically January of 2021, but it'll actually hit stores or hit whatever it's going to hit. I don't even know what will be there to be hit in December in the pandemic, but it'll become available at the very end of December. And that's called A Spy in the Struggle. And I brought a lot of DIY to Kensington because that cover, I searched through a bazillion stock photos to find the cover of that spy and the picture of the Black woman spy, and sent it to them, and they liked it. So they used it, which is great because some of their covers are like, yeah, that's another story. Feel free to ask me about covers.
So this is the cover that you said you found the photo?
Yes, well, and in fact, that's a perfect example. So that cover really reflects my aesthetic. The Uptown Thief cover with like the fake boobs is like, you know, as a spoken word artist, I was like, you know, the queen of body positivity and, you know, be yourself. So I was, I had to write about like, wow, what does it mean to have this cover, you know? But that particular series, the whole Justice Hustler series with those 4 books really is a sort of a Trojan horse series. Like I'm writing these serious political novels about wealth redistribution and women of color who run around stealing stuff from corrupt corporate CEOs. I'm writing them, you know, for poor and working class women of color and everyone else, right? But they are urban fiction and they look like it. And that's important to me. So I wasn't mad when they ended up looking like that. But A Spy in the Struggle definitely looks a little bit more, looks a little more political.
Yeah. And I love how you stick to your values, right? I mean, and like when you start interacting with the publishing industry, large or small, right? There's different kinds of pressures. What's your experience been around that, including working with your agent and your sense of how accessible, you know, how you can get out there being so true to your beliefs?
So, I mean, one of the things that I've learned is that genre is everything. And when I started writing the first book in the Justice Hustler series, I was like, I'm going to sell this book. Because I had written a couple of different books. Oh, in fact, A Spy in the Struggle was a book that I kind of tried to sell. I was very inexperienced at that time in engaging with the industry. And I, you know, like I cringe when I think about how I approached folks. I didn't understand what a query letter was. I was like sending CDs of my spoken word work. It was just like, no, girl, no, you're doing it all wrong. But I had tried to sell these kind of out there, even quirkier books, and I had failed. And so I was like, with this book, I was like, I'm going to just have all the things, right? So I was like, I'm going to have romance, and it's going to be a thriller, but it's going to be a heist, and then some of, it's going to have the sort of the big confrontation with the bad guy at the end, and then it was also like chick lit, and they're going to be shopping, it's like it's going to have really fancy shoes in it, and like anyone who knows me knows I'm like the one walking around in the Tevas, but I'm like, there will be some stiletto shoes because chick lit is obsessed with shoes, so I'm putting some damn shoes. So I threw everything in there that is supposed to sell and still couldn't sell it, right? Still couldn't sell it to a big 5 house. Ultimately, it ended up landing at this genre publisher, even though, a big 5 editor, young woman of color, right? Read it, loved it, got it, understood what I was trying to do, tried to sell it to like, the probably all white editorial team upstairs, and they wouldn't have it. And then, a small like literary indie press sat on it for 2 weeks. They loved it. They wanted it, but they were tiny. They do like, I don't know, 10 books a year or something, and they just couldn't. So it landed at Dafina because it was enough of urban fiction. And basically they publish urban fiction. And if you hit all the right notes in urban fiction, then their readers are voracious and want more books. So it landed there, and it's actually been great. It was great, number one, that they made me write a book a year because I had it in me to do. And, bam, 5 years later, have a series out. And they also have let me do whatever I want, like Hurricane Maria hit, and I was like writing a different book. I was like, I want to write about the hurricane. And they were like, write about the hurricane. So that's how my book was the first novel to come out about Hurricane Maria, because I was already under contract and I just switched topics. So, so all that has been a wild ride in terms of my engaging with the industry. And I've had only editors of color. So Dafina is, it's women of color. And so, there was a colorism issue with my second book's cover, but I just didn't really hold them accountable for it because there's a colorism issue in the country, and there's very much a colorism issue in stock photography. So Taisha Cuvillier, who is the character, is supposed to be, a chocolate-skinned woman, and the character they have on the cover is not. But if you look at stock photography, they were working with what they had. So I sort of took that loss, just like I took the fake boobs on the first cover. And so that was good.
All right, Carmen's got a question. Why don't you go ahead and, Carmen, are you
Yes.
able to unmute and pop in?
Well, or I can just read it. I think you're the first mom writer we've had an opportunity to hear from. Can you talk about being a mom, worker, wife, and artist? Anything you want to add, Carmen?
No, this is stuff me and you talk about all the time. So I just thought it would be cool for other people to hear. But I do think that you have really been able to put your art at the forefront that still is so impressive and amazing to me. And I think it would be great. I'd love to just hear more about how you do it and how you think about it. And I'm sure other people would too. And I don't know, is she the first mom that we've had, Laura?
Yeah, right, because Zetta has a lot of books she's birthed, but not children.
Not children.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, yeah. Well, so there are a couple of things that I will say. The first thing that has been really important for me has been about joy and pleasure. So, and this whole thing about 10,000 hours, somebody else did it originally, but it was the Malcolm Gladwell book that I read that talked about it takes 10,000 hours to develop mastery. I'm not saying I've developed mastery, but it took a lot of writing fiction over a lot of years to get to the point that it was fun and that it was pleasurable and that it wasn't like, what the hell am I doing? Will I ever solve the problems of this novel? Will I ever get there? And So the first thing that I'll say to anyone who's parenting is, particularly moms who are parenting, because the dad gig looks like a different gig to me most of the time. So for moms who are parenting, it's like there's so much you have to do that's boring and feels like drudgery and is unpleasant, you know? And so to be in a place where writing is a struggle with small children is really kind of an unrealistic expectation. So if you're in that place where it's still a struggle, it may be undue pressure to put on yourself to expect to be productive as a writer while your kids are young. When your kids get older and there's a little more room in your life that you could conceivably take a shower, have, you know, go on a walk with a friend and write a little bit, then maybe it's easier to face kind of the big stuff that comes up, right? This will never happen for me. I'm not good enough. I'm selfish to be spending time doing this. Just so many things that can come up for women and moms. And so for me, I was already in a different place with the work before I became a mom. So I have a picture of me. I have a picture that I just took of myself writing with my daughter on my chest, right? Because she would fall asleep and I would run to the computer because I had, you know, my relationship with my writing when she was a baby was, you know, pretty passionate. I had already kind of gotten to the place that it was joyful and exciting and fun. And I was also ambitious, like, I want to publish this. So I was really motivated. And that has been really important. And just to have like a squad. The other thing that I had when my daughter was really little and I couldn't get an agent and I was just despairing was the Hacker Moms, which was this kind of crew of moms in South Berkeley that had this little spot with childcare. And I never got any writing done there, but I could just sit around with other moms and be like, oh my God, will we ever get our lives back? You know, and that was super important. And then the other thing, I really appreciate you asking, Carmen, the other thing that I've needed as a writer and that I have, someone just asked about this, like 2007 or something, before I had a baby, I was on the plane and I was writing and I just wanted so much to like write books, and this video came on with this song by Natasha Bedingfield, Unwritten. And it's just, she's using writing as a metaphor for your life, kind of being in your life. But she says, today's the day your book begins, the rest is still unwritten. And I'm like on the plane crying because I'm like, this is my life, you know, and my Jamaican immigrant husband is horrified that I'm crying on the plane and embarrassing him. But that became my anthem, you know, and every time when I feel stuck and I feel like I can't write or it's hopeless or whatever, I like put on the headphones, blast the anthem. It always makes me cry, and it reminds me that I want this, that this is important to me. And after I have that cry, it sort of clears out my head and I'm able to write. And so that's been pretty foolproof for me in terms of being able to get to it. And yeah, and that's the other thing too, like, oh, and as a mom, like I do NaNoWriMo, I'd be writing at the soccer, you know, practice. I'd be writing at the, you know, have laptop, will travel, just in the orthodontist office, you know, just getting in that 10-minute, that 15-minute, that 30-minute sprint of writing. And NaNoWriMo is fabulous for anyone who hasn't done it. You know, just teaching yourself to produce and not judge at all. You know, that's been so great. And that became a way of life. Like that's the only way that I wrote a book a year, was using the NaNoWriMo method to get that first draft. And that method is basically like 1,600 words a day, quantity over quality. And I'm an outliner, so I'd write an outline, I'd have like a 30-day plan, and it usually took me like 45 days. But I have done it in 30 days, and that was great too.
Awesome. And I think, yeah, most of us are moms, not all, but I think there's a lot of inspiring words there. No one with little tiny ones, I don't think that I know of, but yeah. Anyone else want to just chime in? I think just come into the room and ask a question.
The one other thing the two other things I will say about being a mom is things suffered. Like my social life is really crap, and I think, and that's not good. I think I'm too isolated because I have like my friends in my head that I'm like online and creating their world, right? And so that I think is a place where I've sacrificed. And I don't think that's good. I don't think it's healthy, but it's what's real. Those are the choices that I made. And also, for a long time, I didn't exercise, and that was physically unhealthy. And I couldn't figure it out until I got a treadmill desk. And so I can write and exercise. And that was the only way I figured it out, because I had to multitask it. I couldn't figure out how to make the time for both. Okay, I saw a hand. Was that Angela?
Angela, right?
Hi. Can you talk a little bit about your research that you do for your books? Because I have to imagine you have to, you've got like espionage and all of these things. And so I'm really curious to know, like, what's your process for that? And, at what points are you doing it while you're writing or outlining?
Yes. That's such a great question. So I usually do a little research and then let my imagination run wild. And then I get like 20 different consultants to check my work, right? And so I write about communities that I'm adjacent to or that I'm sort of part of, but not like in the center of. So for example, my first book, Uptown Thief, it had sex workers, it had Puerto Ricans from New York, it had, and I had so many consultants that worked with me on it. I have friends and family members who have been in the sex industries, but not in the way that these particular characters were. And I'm Puerto Rican, but I'm not from New York. And I just wanted to make sure I got my language right. My second book is about an African-American woman from Chicago. And, I'm African-American too. I'm hella things, but I'm not from Chicago. And I got a Black woman from Chicago to vet some of my Chicago details. And, so I do a little research to get the idea, and then sometimes I'll hit something and be like, I need more information, then I do a little more research. But I really like the research, write, and then get feedback process. And I use a lot of different consultants. Some people I pay, some people I have a relationship with, they'll do it for free. Some people are activists and they want to influence creative work that's coming out on the topic, and so they do it for free as part of their activist commitment. I'm working on a sci-fi fantasy middle grade book that has to do with time travel, and one of the characters is Black and Native, so it's interesting. I'm doing some research about some of the indigenous people of New England, and I'm feeling nervous for the first time in a long time, because this is the first book that I'm writing that's actually outside of my heritage. That basically the Justice Hustlers, they're Black, Latin Caribbean, and West Indian, kind of British West Indian. And those are all my roots, right? So I feel like entitled to write about these communities because they're my communities, even though I'm getting consultants. But, I'm going to be writing about indigenous folks from Massachusetts. And so I've already started doing some research online and actually decided to set it with a community that has a lot of information available online. Like that's part of what's driving the decision-making process, is like, what communities do I have access to information about? And so that was interesting. So, and that one I've just started. I've got kind of like a sketchy outline.
Angela will relate to you on that because she's been working on a picture book biography of a indigenous Black person. So
nice, very nice.
Yeah,
it's terrifying. I understand that. You don't want to just be disrespectful or mess it up. So I get that.
Right. Yeah, and that's why it's so great that we have access to sensitivity readers. And my Hurricane Maria book, like oh my God, like so many consultants. I got someone who was a hurricane survivor to vet those details. I I reached out to so many different people and paid different people because I just, I wanted to get it right. You don't want to disrespect people. And there's no reason in 2020 that you can't find access to somebody to give you a hand. And, and I feel lucky to have access to that.
And I'd like to just excerpt that and put it out to the world when people get all butthurt about like sensitivity readers and why should I? It's like, of course you should, right? It's not just like a whatever identity politics thing. It's like you want to be a good writer and you want to get it right thing.
Yeah, and I don't know if you all have talked about American Dirt, but she talked about, well, I did so much research, and it's like, yeah, but you gotta check and make sure that you did it right, because your book it's not a nonfiction book. It's research plus your imagination, and your imagination can distort stuff, and you gotta check. And that's why you get a reader. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't have anyone in my current network who's from this particular New England Indigenous community, but I will figure that out, and I'm sure that there's someone who will be able to help.
And I guess you didn't have to get sensitivity readers for your ray gun chapter book.
No, I didn't. And part of that is the thing my agent said, like, it's just not that deep. So she's sort of an unspecified Afro-Latinx, community. And so, yeah. So, and I realized that, like, usually I've made a decision, like, she's something, but she's not. She's just sort of an unspecified, puffy-haired, girl from a family that speaks Spanish. But it's all vague, like, you only see her mom. Does she have a single mom? Is there a dad somewhere? Did he die? Is he in the military? Who knows? Just all those things are really glossed over. It's just about kind of this plot with these girls.
Right, which really works for that age group too. I mean, yeah. How about anybody else? I don't want to use too much of your time, Aya, but any other questions, comments?
Well, I have kind of a, okay, I'm not going to apologize for it. Aya, it's fantastic to see you. I'm always excited to see you. I've been wondering if everything that's been happening, have you had, we haven't really spoken about it, but I don't, I'm putting myself out there as a writer, as an activist, with everything that's happening and lots of consciences waking up. Have you had people reaching out to you? Have you had demands on, I don't know, and I'm going to single out a little bit the white community because I'm dealing a lot with that right now around the book world, with people asking for book recommendations, asking if I can do book events here, book events there. I'm also going to be honest, I live in a town it's a college town, but it's, I want to say primarily white, very well-intentioned, kind people. But now, and Katrina knows what I'm talking about, we're having to deal also a little bit with white guilt. So my question to you is, if this is also happening to you, how do you handle that and don't burn out? And because I feel like this is a very interesting moment to bring about change in kind of, instilling a little bit of education, etc., doing some teaching. So how do you not get burned out? And secondly, did you see a spike in your book sales, which I hope you did?
What a good question. So the thing that I'll say about book sales, I would be so anxious if I was paying attention to my book sales. I can't pay attention to it. So I have no idea. But I did pop up on some summer lists, so that's interesting. So I have had people reaching out to me. I have had non-Black and white people reaching out to me. And I actually wrote, so, I'll wind it back. So one of the other writing things that I have been doing is I write for this blog called The Daily Dose, Feminist Voices for the Green New Deal. So a bunch of us Bay Area writers, women writers, founded a blog because we were writing about the Green New Deal, and we would write things that were really timely and be pitching them places. And then by the time we even got a no, they were kind of stale. So we're like, you know what, let's have a blog. So I've been writing a bunch on the blog about it. And then I have a piece that's actually about this. that's about like what it's like to have all these non-Black people calling you, kind of checking on you. And so like the opening paragraphs are like, you know, the first one is like, why are you calling me? You think I want to be reminded that my people are being lynched in the street? This is so disrespectful that you're calling me. And then to all the people who haven't called me, why aren't you calling me? Don't you know my people are being lynched in the street? Like, it's sort of like this, and it also talks about sort of my assimilation as a Black woman. Like, I'm a pretty radical, but there's some place interpersonally that I'm used to taking care of white people, and I'm used to taking care of non-Black people. So like, suddenly everybody's contacting me, and like nothing feels right, and nothing that I can say feels right. It doesn't feel authentic, you know. It's like, and I can't quite be fake because the moment is so intense. So I wrote that piece, and you know, my agent sent it out, and so Guernica's sitting on it. Hopefully they'll publish it. And I've definitely been getting asked to do talks, right? And one of the things for me, because I do have a 10-year-old, my activism has been limited. So I'm not going out to protest without my kid, and I'm also not taking my kid to a lot of these protests because they're either dangerous or people are expressing a certain kind of distress and despair that I don't want her seeing at this age, right? She gets to know what's going on. And she also gets to know that people are fighting and that we're winning some really important battles. But I don't necessarily want her to have to be in a situation where she's bearing witness to this sort of raw, brutal grief of Black people and our allies. So, so I'm accepting that I'm not out in the street all the time, but we've gone to a couple of kid-friendly protests and those have gone well. In fact, when Laura first asked me to come on this call, I was like, well, I'm trying to find the kid protest schedule. And it's all very like, you know, you hear about things last minute. So this morning I heard about one today at 5. I was like, oh, it's all good, you know. So so there's that piece. But the thing I will say that's been really interesting is that I'm part of a peer counseling community. And when white and non-Black people in that community reached out to me, it worked because we already had a relationship in which I could be uncensored, right? And so, and they had something to offer me. They were like, hi, you know, it's a peer counseling. So usually if you're on the phone for 10 minutes, you talk for 5 minutes, the other person talks for 5 minutes. That's how you do it. But because our community is in this deep crisis and, you know, Black people are so triggered, these white and non-Black people of color contacting me and being like, can I listen to you for 5 minutes? Yes, you can, you know? And so then I would laugh and cry and scream and rage for like those 5 minutes. And because of the, you know, situation, instead of me also listening to them, it was just time for me. And so that felt right. It felt right. They were offering me what I needed, and they were offering it under a set of conditions that acknowledged that my people had been harmed, that it would be very triggering, and that I needed to be listened to, and that I needed to let emotions out. And so that has been really helpful. And I wrote about that a little, like I said, in this piece, about like what it is that people could give me. And then kind of in the second part, I talked about defunding the police, right? And that I do know what to tell white people now. Get on board with defunding the police. Like that is the demand, you know, and it's not just about what happened, but that has been going on. It's about this opportunity for us to turn the corner and shift the conversation. And for people who have generally had good experiences with the police, understanding that the protection that they've been receiving is at a cost, and they need to get on board with this shift. So that has been important for me, kind of as an activist. That's sort of a, you know, putting together the mom stuff, the activism stuff, the emotional stuff, and yeah, and it's weird and awkward. I know other Black people who are like, who have like, people have called, like, are you okay? And they're like, I'm defriending you because like I can feel something funky in you like I'm your one Black friend that you're like checking on, but there's something ungrounded or creepy about it, you know, that she was like, yeah. So it's hard. And I think the other thing that is so useful in sort of the social contract of the peer counseling community, it's understood that listening is valuable and people can listen and get out of the way, right? And people are like, I'm calling to check on you, but they're talking, right? And then you end up having to listen to their feelings. It's like, that is exactly what we don't want, right? So that emotional caretaking. So yeah, there was just something about that peer counseling paradigm where it was clear what they were bringing and that I didn't have to take care of them. Because, you know, as a Black woman, I'm still so deeply conditioned to be doing that all the time, whether I even know it or not.
What is this peer counseling that you're talking about? One, and then also what I've done is I have a white ally friend who we've talked about race and all kinds in class and all kinds of issues since, you know, we've known each other for 3 or 4 years. And so it's a conversation that we've been having all along. So when she reached out, I was like, oh, this feels right because we've already talked about this. This is nothing new. I know what you know. But then I heard the idea of, I enlisted her. I was like, look, if somebody else asks me questions, I'm just going to give them your number so that you can take care of it, you know, because I'm not going to be like teaching white people right now. You can help me with that. And so I think that's a good thing to do, you know, if you don't have the energy and how to preserve energy, like enlist someone else to do it.
That's right.
So what's the peer counseling? I've never heard of.
So a couple of things. The first that I will say is that's great. And part of it is like in a crisis, right? You can't be like building the fresh relationship with white people in the moment of crisis, right? Either it's built or it's not built. And you're really speaking to this relationship where you had built that intimacy, you trusted that person, you'd had conversations where you brought up things that either were uncomfortable or were uncomfortable with some other white people, and they were able to like be calm and real. And then in the crisis, you could trust them and then even call on them to be an ally. So as far as this question about peer counseling, I'm actually going to kick it to Carmen because I know Carmen has been doing some organizing of Black people and particularly Black women in peer counseling. Carmen, is that all right?
Sure. I mean, I can answer and you can jump in whenever. So the peer counseling that I is talking about is an organization called Reevaluation Counseling. And it's basically what I is talking about. It's a community of people that do peer counseling with each other. We listen to each other for a set amount of time. And the idea is that all of us are born good. And there's just things that happen to us in our early lives that make it hard for us to have the lives that we want. So what we do as counselors is really try to help people work on these early hurts so that they can think more clearly in the present. So you kind of know this because, you know, maybe you're at work and somebody says something and all of a sudden you get like you feel really angry or really sad. And what we would say is that you're restimulated because what's happening in the present connects very much to something that's happened in the past. So we try to go back and work on those past hurts and kind of drain them so that we can think more clearly in the present. So sometimes we might have a person that looks like somebody in our family or in our life that hurt us. So anytime that person comes around, we feel, oh my God, we would feel scared or like they're gonna hurt us merely because something about them reminds us of that person. So for example, there's a co-counselor that I'm very close with that reminds me of my little sister. And we're in a relationship where I am, I guess, kind of mentoring her. So I'm kind of in this big sister position already. And so some things get hard for me in the relationship because she reminds me so much of my little sister. So I get to go have what we call sessions. And that's just a time that you share with somebody or a group of people to work on those feelings so that I can remember, oh yeah, she is not my sister. You know, what I think is happening in the past isn't happening. So Yeah, I mean, I'll totally, what I've been doing, I was talking about is in Oakland, so in co-counseling or reevaluation counseling, we're broken up into different regions. And so like I is in the Berkeley region and I'm in the Oakland region. And in the Oakland region, I've been trying to build Black RC, so bringing Black people into co-counseling. And so every now and then we have like an intro night, and that's a chance where, you know, you could come and learn more about co-counseling. And right now I'm teaching a fundamentals class, and that's kind of the intro class that you do in order to be a part of the community, where you learn about co-counseling theory, because there's actually theory and practice and guidelines and things like that. So I've been doing that with a group of Black women for the last year. It's been like 9 Black women in the class. Yeah, but I'm happy to answer more questions or talk about them more with you all.
Thanks.
Yeah. Carmen is a great teacher and an incredible resource in the community, you know. And I feel like that's also part of how I do it, right? You know, like people are like, oh, you're so accomplished. It's like, and I be laid out, you know, crying about this and that on the way, you know, and in connection to this, I'll also say like the whole, like my relationship to the literary industry is all a series of opportunities to work on my relationship with my father. Right? It's like, you're so important. If only you would pay attention to me. It's like dad, and more dad. Wow. You know, if only the agent would respond. Like, oh my God, so much therapy being had. And so it's like, and that's what allows me to do my stuff. You know, that's what allows me to do my thing as a writer, is being triggered all the time in my career and then working on it, or the stuff that came up earlier in my writing life, like so triggered about writing, am I good enough? And then getting to cry about whatever early piece that's about. Like, yeah, my work is good enough. And if it's not, you keep doing it, you get better, and then it will be, right? But it's the angst that's so connected to all of it is old. It's usually early stuff. And then the other thing I'll just say, bringing it around to the stuff around George Floyd, is one of the biggest pieces of power that white supremacy has is to terrify us and make us feel small, right? And the truth is that Black people are powerful, all people are powerful, and we're seeing that right now as this movement is rising up with our allies backing us, and we're stepping into a different kind of power, and actually we have gains that nobody thought possible, right? Minneapolis Police Department, we're just going to end the police department and we're just going to defund it and do something different. People are like, what? You know, but that's because people have been working for a long time. But part of what has to happen is we have to be able to get outside of that terrified place. And so for me, I think, you know, I laughingly say like, oh, I deal with anxiety by being productive, which is true. It's something I get to work on in my sessions. But it's also that I've done a lot of work on the emotions that held me back. And so now I sit down to write and I'm like, woohoo, what do I want to write about now? You know, and it's partly joyful because I've cleaned up all the different pieces of childhood trauma that used to be hooked in to the writing process. And now it's just a joyful thing in the present. Like the Albert Einstein quote that I came across recently is, creativity is intelligence having fun. And that's what it feels like for me. Like I get to use my mind to have fun and create stories, and it's joyful, you know, but it's been a lot of work to get to that joy. And that's the thing that I sort of say to moms, like it's hard with young kids to find that joy for you, not the joy that you get through the parenting, but your own joy. And so like, it may be a little much to ask to be in the hard place with writing, but once you get, you know, if you keep doing it, you'll get to that joy, and it's so fun.
And I have so much inspiration. Like, thank you. And I think this is so much what people need to hear right now. And you know, and I want to apologize to all of you for the white people who are getting in touch and saying, "No, how you doing?" we can suck a lot of the time. So. And I don't want to take advantage. Do you like, one more question? You good?
Sure. Yeah. Good. I've got the child care. I'm like, yes, another question.
All right. Anybody else? Question, comment? Angela, you've got your, I always coming back to you with your thinking about self-care and creative care. Do you want to?
I mean, a lot of the discussion that you've been talking about around the peer counseling is really interesting and sounds so wonderful and necessary. But that is one of the things that I've been talking to Laura and the group, the writers group, a lot about is, it's not just about the process of writing and getting publishing and all of that, but it's also the emotional journey of a writer. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about that. I mean, you've already talked about like being a mother and a writer and jumping through the hoops of, traditional publishing or even just self-publishing, but there's still, I feel like there's like still this bigger ring around the emotional piece that nobody ever prepares you for.
Oh my God, so much there, yes. So, I mean, I see different layers of it. So one layer is about oppression, and everybody, whatever their race or gender or other identity demographics, were children, and as children we're just, not listened to and are, often sort of marginalized in our thinking. And so part of writing is coming to voice and deciding that somebody cares about what we have to say. And depending on how deep, how much we were hurt there, it also has to do with hurts that we have in school, like our minds as women, people of color, poor and working class folks are so systematically attacked in the educational system, and we're told that we're wrong. So like we come to the page with all that baggage. And, especially for women, that we're supposed to be taking care of other people and it's selfish and, I know, so many stories. So that's one of the places where we have to fight. There's a fight there for our mind and for the right to write. And having to feel those feelings, having to feel those uncomfortable feelings. And I feel like that's been really critical. I think the other thing for me too, like I said, I have a really kind of a mixed background, African-American and Latinx and Caribbean. And so really early, like in college, as a writer, I had these agendas that came out of my insecurity. So, like I was writing these books and the books were very Black, because I needed everyone to know how Black I was, because it was coming out of insecurity. And so the stories weren't quite right because they weren't grounded in my connection to self and others. It was, they were coming out of an insecurity of like a false self that I was creating to show people, and so then I did, so I couldn't get my novels together for a long time, but I got a lot of therapy and peer counseling, and then I was grounded, and then I knew what I wanted to say because there was nothing that I needed to say about myself that was false. But it's been interesting, different layers of stuff. Like I said, all the dad stuff. My mom and I are really tight, but my dad was really absent. And so all the dad stuff of like, I want your approval, Dad, between agents and editors and prizes and rah, rah, rah. Like all that stuff on the journey is dad stuff for me. And just even knowing that is so helpful. Like the thing you were saying, Carmen, whatever's happening in the present, in co-counseling, we talk about restimulation, but I think a more sort of term in use outside of co-counseling is just triggered, right? Like if I know that I'm triggered by the search for an agent and it's not actually about the agent, then I can relax a little bit about that and just work on the old stuff with my dad, or be like, thank goodness I'm not 3 and these people aren't my dad, and so I think that's super important. And then I just have to say, like for women and especially women of color, it is a really powerful thing to want to be big and successful, for us to want our work to be big and successful. And we may have to feel a lot of feelings if we decide to go after being big and successful. But I know for me, one of the feelings that comes up sometimes is jealousy. And I feel like when I'm feeling jealous, I know that there's something I want that I either can't admit that I want, haven't gotten yet, or don't quite feel like I can totally go for or totally own and claim. So I just feel like huge amounts of emotional stuff to work through. Not to mention, like, and then when we write about stuff that's heavy, then we, you know, I'd be triggering myself when I'm writing because I write about trauma, like, you know, or, you know, I'll feel like I'm blocked. I'm not blocked. I'm writing about, you know, sexual violence. Who wants to go write about that? You know, so, I mean, there's just so much, but it, but I mean, I feel like part of the joy of writing is that I feel like I'm writing my way through these things. And I mean, I could just sit on the couch and just do therapy, and that would be good too. But it's kind of like part of what's powerful is there's something I want, and I can see how the internalized racism or sexism or classism or the early hurts are holding me back. And so then it's like using that piece of I want the art as the momentum to push through those different blocks and obstacles and barriers, both internal and external. And, you know, the thing everybody says, it's about the perseverance. And the perseverance is really about facing the feelings of discouragement that come up 10,000 times with 10,000 rejections and getting to that place where you're no longer that 3-year-old or 5-year-old or whatever wanting someone's approval, that you're like, I'm a grown-ass writer, and you know, you ain't the only agent in town, or you ain't the only 85 agents in town. I'm going to keep going, you know, and you keep going.
That was great. Thank you.
Yeah, Angela, you're going to have quite a collection here. You definitely.
I know. I'm like, this has been great. Like, you're helping me to do my research.
Yeah, but it's such good stuff. Anybody else? Any comments or questions? Janine, anything coming up for you? Nope.
Could I ask something? I'm just curious, not to put Katrina on the spot, but I know I'm just hoping that Katrina isn't staying silent because, you know, she's not officially part of the mentee group. But
yeah, you're welcome to come in this.
Yeah, what you got? It's all good.
I honestly, the only thing I was gonna say was maybe you can make that book that where you had the idea of the fairies, but it was like the genealogy fairy. I think that would be a great in-depth storyline. It doesn't have to be like a storyline that is like as hollow as those books, but you know, it has a certain message to it that I would like to hear more. That would be a great book to have in our collection. But other than that, I don't have any like specific questions. I do like hearing about processes and the things that people do on the side that gets them there. You have my brain going about it being an illustrator and I've always wanted to do those things, but never felt like I had the creativity. Even writing, I can write a prompt, but I don't have any stories inside me that are like begging to come out. So, but I do like the fact that, you know, you have those in you, and it's good that there is somebody that has that inspiration, because it hasn't quite got to me yet. And you mentioned earlier that when you had your child around the age of 40, that was when that happened. And if, you know, maybe it'll happen for me, but I don't know. So I feel like I'm in a group where I'm just sort of on the outskirts of the whole writing thing. I'm the person that wants to get the books out there, you know.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, the one thought that I have is back in the 90s, late 80s or early 90s, Julia Cameron put out this book called The Artist's Way. And, you know, she talked about this concept of shadow artists. And so a lot of times people will be around artists or books who have like sort of a desire to write, but something isn't quite connected emotionally with that desire. You know, because when you say, I don't have stories inside me, I don't believe that. But it may be that something's not quite connected. And so, you know, whether it's peer counseling or something like Julia Cameron's artist pages or it's just morning pages. It's just, I'm always curious. And one thing I've always said is if you've ever had a fleeting thought that you might be interested in writing, like I say, follow that down the rabbit hole, you know, because I think sometimes stories are easily accessible and sometimes it takes a little more work to find them. But I feel like we all have so many stories, you know. I feel like we all do, and it's an interesting experiment. Like you said, like start with a prompt, and I also think it takes some time to develop it. Like it took me a long time to sort of develop a novel or to develop the capacity. And once I had written a few novels, now I can be like, I've got a novel idea. But it's because I've done it so many times that I've created that space in my mind that my mind can create a novel in a way that it didn't used to. And that's, you know, it's like, oh, wow, I can do that in a way that it used to be harder. So it's not like it's not that it has to come easily at first in order for it to be for you. It may be that it's, you know, takes a little more time and struggle, but then at some point things can click and then you're like, oh yeah, you know, and that can be exciting. And then I'll just say about the ancestor fairy, you know, the book is written, you know, and it kind of follows the rainbow magic fairy style. So, you know, at some point, some rogue publisher will be like, yeah, I'll publish that. Why not? You know, and so it'll pop up. We'll let you know. It can show up in the library. And I, like I said, I literally like found what would be the name, my pseudonym, that it would be just like right next to there, and like people will end up picking it out by mistake.
Well, and the funny thing, people may not know this about those Rainbow Fairy books. They're all written by one person, but they're all people writing them. They hire people to write them. I know several people who've done it. And you can see who it is because they get thanked in the acknowledgement section. So that person who's acknowledged is actually the author, and they're given super strict, like this number of pages, and this happens right here. And, you know, so the publisher basically, or the packager, I think usually who does it, really, you know, controls the whole thing.
Yeah, it's a total formula.
Yeah, so there's not an author. And just to follow up on what I was just saying, for you, Katrina, yeah, I think The Artist's Way is a pretty powerful tool. Looks like a lot of thumbs up. And I think the best way to do it is with other people. So if you can find a person or a couple of people that you love and trust, like Natalie, if she's willing, or others.
No, I was thinking the group, like Manzanita is a writers group as well. I'm just saying,
It
you know,
is,
like,
and you'd be totally welcome to join. I mean, because the other thing I was going to say, so Writer's Way, I think is great for like some of what I was saying too about the block stuff, like the shadow thing. Like I totally recognize that, right? I've been an editor forever, but I was like, well, I'm not creative. I help creative people. That's what I do, right? So when I read that, I was like, oh, maybe I'm one of those people. But like Rishvika, who's not here, but she will definitely be watching this because I just did my mentoring with her today. She's a little bit younger, and I think she's often felt like she'll say, oh, I'm not worthy, kind of, you know, you all are so, you know, whatever. But I think everyone here can attest, having read her picture book, like she's totally, you know, she's amazing and she's worthy and she should be here and she has so much to contribute. And she's learning and participating, like, you know, finding a creative space that's going to help kind of nurture you, that feels safe, you know, and being creative is such a like therapeutic thing. I mean, when I did go do an MFA, and everyone doesn't need to do that, and it's expensive, and part of what I hope in this space is that it can do that for people who can't spend thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for it. but that meeting your creative self is incredible. It's like with the first semester I did my MFA, I felt like I was falling in love with myself, which sounds really weird, but you know, it's not just, oh, like to get words on the page, but if you really do it and kind of dedicate to it, it can be a very beautiful personal thing, as well as, you know, you could be creating great stories. You're a librarian. You are going to bring a lot of knowledge to the table. So,
Laura, I know we, you know, at the end of our session, but I was wondering, like, could I ask one really quick burning question? I was wondering how, if you've ever had to deal with the imposter syndrome and how you overcame it. The reason I'm asking that is because I'm in awe of everything you've done, including the fact that you illustrated this last book that's coming out. And I'm struggling with that because the very first book I wrote, I was 7 years old. When I was a kid, I was fearless. I had less holds as I do now. And so I just like wrote a story, I illustrated it, I taught myself how to draw. And then I made it happen. And then I was selling the copies to my classmates, right? And then I grew up still drawing, picking up painting, went to art workshop. Mira Reisberg was one of my art mentor. I did, you know, workshops with Maya as well. But then there is this project which I know I'm called to illustrate, and I've had like many people asking me to do it, and I'm frozen because I'm thinking, you know, I have so much respect for illustrators, for Janine and for Rob and for everyone out there. But if you ask me, I'll tell you, I don't have a degree in illustration. You know, like I don't know how to do it basically. Janine, your books are fantastic. So how did you, the thing is, I look at you, Aya, and you're like this force that just boom, you know, like you see it and then you go for it and you make it happen. How do you do that? How do you set yourself free?
Well, so there are a couple of things. This is such a good question. The first thing is definitely with the peer counseling. I mean, I hit a huge piece of imposter syndrome in writing the Puerto Rico hurricane book. I was the wrong person. I knew that there was somebody else who was, this is too, like, it's fine that I'm writing these heist novels, but now I'm taking on a really serious topic and I'm wrong, the series is wrong, everything's wrong. And so I just had to cry my way through that one. You know, I had to let the feelings come and hold a perspective that they weren't true and just like do the emotional work there. The other thought that I have too is like, don't let the technology stand in your way. When you were 7, if you weren't working in an illustration program, work with whatever you worked with when you were 7. Maybe you need to do it in crayon. Maybe you need to do it in marker. Like, I don't know, but just trust that 7-year-old. Find her. How is she comfortable? You know, like that was the thing. Like I said, I can't, I work in Canva. That's all I got. Like, I can't illustrate. I needed markers and I needed to photocopy it. And it's, there's so many copies that like the little dots from like when there's dust on the copier are actually in the final. It just was like, I don't have time to get rid of these damn dots. This is just what it is, you know, and really, and that leads us to my final thing, which is lower the bar, you know, like when in doubt, lower the bar, you know, make it, as opposed to being like what you can do, like instead of being like, I've got to do what those people are doing or I've got to do it this way, just lower the bar. And yeah, and I had to, because, you know, I mean, I wanted it to be, I mean, I wanted the image to be like colorful and eye-catching, but like it is not. It's not professional looking, and that's fine, you know. And if you're called to do it, yeah, lower the bar, do what feels right to you. And I just think in all of this like professionalization, it just brings up really deep pieces of our internalized classism. And I feel like the classism is like, you know, I've got to be super professional, or like it's not good enough and nobody wants to see it. And, you know, the truth is that people have told stories for, you know, since the beginning of time, and they did not need degrees, and people have drawn and drawn pictures, and they didn't need to go to art school. And so I would say, yeah, I feel like those are the three things. one, lower the bar. two, trust that 7-year-old, use what she used that was so joyful and, you know, will remind you of your fearlessness. That fearlessness is not gone. It's just, you know, probably been buried over with a few experiences of racism, sexism, xenophobia, and God only knows what else over the years. But she's still in there. Like, see what she wants. And, you know, and all this technology is supposed to be helping us, but if it freaks you out, don't mess with it. Do what feels right to you. Get that pen. That's right.
Yes. Yes. Wise
Thank you
words.
so much.
We all want to see it, Natalie. You can bring some drawings to the group.
Thanks.
Yes.
And Janine also for the encouragement. Thank you all. Okay.
And I, you know,
now I feel accountable.
good. And I think Zeta is such a great inspiration on that front too, right? And she says that, like, there are a lot of people who be precious and spend a lot more time, and you were saying that too, like how many rounds of edits or this or that. And Zeta's like, I'm getting these books out there, you know, and you look at even how the books have progressed and they've changed the way they've looked. She's learned, you know, she's found illustrators she likes. Like, I do think, and that article on aesthetics that Nisha Meminger wrote, I don't know if people have read that, but I feel like that says so much about the kind of oppression, right, of, you know, in the publishing industry acting like they've got the, you know, monopoly on what books should look like. You know, kids, you think of kids' drawings, what kids like, it's, yeah, it's bullshit.
Definitely.
And Janine wrote this quote, what Mona Hayter says, that liberation takes discipline. Thank you, Aya, for modeling this concept via your depth of self-reflection and personal and world work. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, and the other thing that I want to say, with this new book, I did a reading for Moe's, and like as I'm reading it for Moe's, I'm like catching a typo, and I'm like, you know, it's not. I could wait until it was perfect, or, you know, I could wait until I had like a well-funded team of editors, and I'm just not going to. I'm just not going to. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna put it out there, and I'm gonna keep it moving, you know, and that for me is really joyful and effective.
Yeah. Awesome. Liberation. I think it is liberation, and we're at this moment, right? Everything's cracking open. And it is time to build the new reality that we all want to see. Yeah. And the publishing industry is not going to be doing it. Like, so we need to.
Yeah, that's right. And have that flexibility, you know, like they can be helpful sometimes. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But that can't stop us.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I feel like we've gone on a whole journey. Like, this has been
I know, this is
awesome.
so fun.
And can you?
I know, the only.
Yeah, go on.
I was gonna say, like, for me, like the only thing that's almost as fun as writing is talking about it with people. I love to talk about it.
Yay! Well, come by anytime. And thank you for recommending Carmen. We love Carmen. And send links out. You can send them to me or to everyone. I think I emailed you on a Zoom thing, but like your launch event, anything else? You know, you talked about the New Deal, Green New Deal piece, or like.
Oh yeah,
please
that's
share.
right. Yes, I will. And you know, I just want to say you all have such a great leg up to have a community. You know, and Laura is a great facilitator and just really with so much heart in terms of backing social justice communities and writers of color for young people. Like, it makes such a difference, the kinds of stories that we tell. Your series with, you know, Biddy Mason and Fred Korematsu is amazing. And just the way that you're modeling, building partnerships with writers of color and in communities of color is really, really wonderful. And like, Laura's the one that I go to with children's anything, like, hey, what do you think of this? You know, it's like, now we're 2-3 books in, it's really been helpful. So you all have and you have each other, you know, and that's so much of it. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Aya. And Aya and I were actually at Berkeley High together. I think I knew more about Aya
back in the day.
Aya was like the super cool, like couple years, I think, ahead.
Yeah, I know. You were like 2 years younger, which now is nothing, and then was like so much.
So thank you, Aya. And
thank you.
Thank you to everyone for coming. And
thanks, Aya.
I'll share the link once
Carmen.
the video is up.
Yes. Right on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, y'all. You're awesome.
Nice to see
Have a
you.
good